Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of the frontier. The wind swept across the Arizona plains like a whisper from the past, dry, restless, and heavy with the scent of dust and sage. The horizon shimmered in the late afternoon sun, and beyond the hills, the land seemed to breathe with secrets of the old frontier, a place where life and death often shared the same road. In that lonely stretch of wilderness stood a small ranch, weathered wood, a single corral, and smoke curling from a cracked chimney. It belonged to Clara Whitmore, a woman not yet 30, though her eyes carried the tired wisdom of someone who had seen more winters than she ought to have. Her husband had been gone 2 years now, killed in one of the countless clashes between settlers and the Apache. Since then, Clara had lived alone with only her horse, 2 goats, and a quiet kind of strength that came from surviving heartbreak. Every day she worked the same rhythm: mend the fence, feed the animals, tend the small patch of corn that refused to die. But when night came, and the coyotes howled in the distance, loneliness pressed against the walls of her cabin like a ghost that wouldn't leave. She wasn't a doctor by trade, but everyone in the nearby settlement called her the healer woman. It was a skill she'd learned from her father, a Union medic who taught her to stitch wounds and boil herbs long before she could ride a horse. In those wild lands, where doctors were rarer than rainfall, Clara's hands often decided whether a man lived or died. But kindness was dangerous in the frontier. Mercy, too, because mercy didn't ask what color your skin was, or which side you rode for. That evening, the wind changed. It carried something sharp, the smell of gunpowder and blood. Clara was chopping firewood when her horse, Rufus, lifted his head and snorted nervously toward the canyon trail. "Easy, boy," she murmured, wiping sweat from her brow. But she felt it too, that instinctive pull in the air, that silence before something changes forever. A few minutes later, she heard it, a low, broken groan, faint, but human. It came from near the barn. Her heart jumped. Every story she'd ever heard about raiders and deserters flashed through her mind. Still, she grabbed her lantern and an old rifle, stepping cautiously into the gathering dusk. The sound came again, weaker this time, a breath, a whisper. When she reached the barn, the sight froze her where she stood. A man lay half collapsed beside the haystack, his shirt soaked in blood. An arrow was broken near his shoulder, and a bullet wound glistened on his chest. His skin was dark copper, his hair long and braided with leather strips, and around his neck hung a pendant of bone and turquoise. He was Apache. For a heartbeat, Clara couldn't move. Fear clawed up her throat. Every warning she'd ever been told about Apaches came crashing back. They attack settlers. They take scalps. They show no mercy. And yet, there was no hatred in this man's face, only pain. He looked barely alive. She knelt beside him, lantern light trembling in her hand. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. His lips moved. She caught the word water. Clara's hands shook. If anyone from the settlement found out she helped an Apache, they'd call her a traitor, maybe worse. But leaving him here watching a man bleed out under her roof, she couldn't do it. "Lord, forgive me," she muttered, setting the rifle down. "You'll die out here." With all her strength, she pulled him into the barn and laid him on a pile of hay. His blood stained her apron, warm and thick. She fetched water in her medical chest, a worn wooden box filled with herbs, bandages, and hope. As she cut open his shirt, she froze again. On his chest, beneath the blood and dust, was an intricate tattoo, an eagle clutching a spear. She'd seen that symbol before. Her breath caught. It was the mark of an Apache chief. Outside, the desert wind howled against the boards of her cabin. Like it knew the storm she had just invited in, Clara Whitmore pressed her hand to the man's wound, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure she believed anymore. "Stay alive," she murmured. "Please, stay alive." In the darkness of that lonely ranch, a fragile bond began, one that would shake the borderlands by sunrise. Night swallowed the desert in silence. The moon hung low, throwing pale silver light over the barn and the lonely figure inside. Clara knelt beside the wounded Apache, her sleeves rolled up, her hands slick with blood and water. Every breath the man took was shallow and strained, the kind that made her count seconds between each exhale. Wondering if it would be his last, her lantern flickered weakly, shadows crawling up the wooden walls. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and smoke. She had cleaned enough wounds to know that this one was close to fatal. The bullet had torn through his upper chest, grazing the bone but missing the heart by a whisper. "Hold on," she whispered, not knowing if he understood her. "You're too stubborn to die. I can tell." The man's eyes fluttered open, deep brown, fierce even in pain. For a moment, their gazes locked. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken, his tongue heavy with his own language. Clara reached for a damp cloth, pressing it to his lips. "Don't talk," she murmured. "You need rest." But he shook his head weakly and said one word in broken English. "Why?" The question made her pause. Why, indeed? Why would a white woman help an Apache warrior when every man in town would have shot him on sight? Clara didn't have an answer that made sense. She just said softly, "Because you're bleeding." He stared at her for a long moment before his eyes closed again. Clara worked through the hours, boiling water on the stove in the corner of the barn, cleaning the wound, removing the bullet fragment with trembling fingers, She whispered prayers under her breath, half habit, half hope, as she wrapped him in clean bandages made from torn bedsheets. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon, carrying the faint cry of a coyote. The sound always reminded her how far from civilization she truly was, how small and fragile one life could be out here. When the bleeding finally slowed, she sat back, exhausted. Her hands were raw, her breath shallow. The man lay still, his chest rising gently now. For the first time since she found him, he seemed at peace. Clara leaned against a wooden post, closing her eyes. Her mind swirled with doubt. What if soldiers come? What if he wakes up angry? Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A healer's duty ends where fear begins. But tonight, that line didn't seem so clear. She heard Rufus neigh softly outside, uneasy. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. Clara took her rifle and stepped to the barn door, scanning the plains. The horizon was empty. No campfires, no movement, just miles of sand and moonlight. When she returned, the man was awake again. His breathing had steadied, and his gaze followed her every move. His eyes weren't cold, they were cautious, assessing, the kind of eyes that had seen betrayal too many times to trust easily. Clara poured water into a tin cup and helped him sit up slightly. He winced but accepted it. You need to drink, she said. He obeyed, taking slow sips. She studied him quietly. His hair was braided with eagle feathers and beads of turquoise symbols she'd seen only in stories. Around his neck hung a small bone pendant carved with strange markings. She reached out curiously, but he caught her wrist, firm, yet not cruel. Don't, he said. His voice was rough but steady. Clara froze, then nodded and withdrew her hand. All right, she said softly. No touching. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the wind filled the space between them. Then he asked, in halting English, You live alone? Yes, she replied. For 2 years now. He nodded slowly, understanding more than her words. His gaze softened, as if he saw not an enemy, but another soul surviving a war she didn't start. Name, he asked Clara. He repeated it carefully. Clara. Then, with a faint hint of pride, he said Taza. She blinked. The name stirred something. She'd heard it whispered by traders and soldiers alike. Taza, son of Apache chief. Her pulse quickened. She had saved the life of a man the army hunted. Taza noticed her change in expression but said nothing. His strength was returning, little by little, and with it came an air of authority impossible to ignore. You helped me, he said finally. Why you not afraid? Clara forced a small smile. I am afraid, she admitted, but I'm more afraid of doing nothing. Taza looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. You, brave. She turned away to hide her trembling hands. No, she whispered, just human. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise, painting the desert gold. Clara looked out through the cracks in the barn wall, unaware that the soldiers she had lied to yesterday were not the only ones searching. Far beyond the hills, a war drum sounded faintly, and it was moving her way. Clara stood at the barn door, her arms folded, staring at the horizon. The desert was still, even the cicadas had fallen silent. Behind her, the faint rustle of hay reminded her she was not alone. The wounded Mantazo is awake again, propped up against a pile of blankets she'd arranged beneath him. His eyes followed her, calm yet guarded, like a wolf watching from the shadows. He had survived the night. Against every odd, every fear, he was still breathing. Morning, she said quietly. Stepping closer, Taz's gaze flicked to the sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wood. You, no sleep, he observed in his broken English. Couldn't, Clara admitted, forcing a tired smile. Didn't seem right to rest while someone was bleeding to death under my roof. That almost made him smile, but only almost. His face remained carved from stone. She poured some water into a bowl, wrung out a cloth, and began cleaning the dried blood from his chest. Her fingers trembled as she peeled away the old bandages. The wound looked better, no infection yet, though the edges were still raw. Hold still, she murmured. I need to change this. He winced as the cold water touched his skin but didn't move. Clara worked with care, her hands sure and steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her. But when she pulled back the cloth, her eyes caught again on the design inked across his chest. The eagle and spear tattoo. Bold, black lines curved across the muscles, crowned by intricate symbols she didn't recognize. Her breath hitched. She'd seen that image before, drawn crudely in wanted posters. Mentioned in army briefings, overheard in the settlement tavern. The mark of the Apache chief. Her heart pounded in her throat. Dear God, she thought, what have I done? She looked up at him. You're not just a warrior, are you? Taz's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't answer at first. Then, after a long pause, he said, I lead my people. There it was, plain and certain. The man she had dragged into her barn, fed and bandaged, was one of the most wanted figures in the Arizona territory. Clara stepped back, suddenly aware of how small the space was. If the soldiers find you here, she said softly, they'll hang me for treason. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, why help? The question struck her again sharp, like a blade finding the same wound twice. She turned away, staring at the slats of sunlight cutting across the barn floor. "Because I've seen enough dying," she said finally. "My husband was killed near the San Pedro River set. It was the Apache who did it. Maybe it was, but the day I buried him, I swore I wouldn't add to the hate. Not if I could help it." Taza was silent. For a moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of hay and the distant cry of a hawk outside. Then he said quietly, "Your husband was soldier." Clara nodded. "Scout for the cavalry." He took that in without reaction, only a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. "War takes many things," he said in a low voice. "Land, sons, peace." He paused. "I do not want war, but it comes like rain." Clara met his gaze, then steady, cautious, and filled with something unspoken. She realized that behind his fierce exterior, there was exhaustion too, not just from blood loss, but from years of loss itself. "You should rest," she said, trying to steady her voice. He nodded once. "I leave when strong." Clara frowned. "You can't go anywhere. The soldiers are still patrolling the canyons. They were here last night asking questions." Taz's eyes sharpened. "You told them." "I told them nothing." He studied her for a long time, then said simply, "You risk much." "I suppose I have a habit of that," she murmured. Changing his bandage, when she was done, she stepped outside to fetch more water. The morning air was crisp and dry, the kind that made the desert seem endless. But as she filled her bucket from the well, she felt that strange prickling along her neck. Someone was watching. She turned, eyes scanning the ridge. Nothing, only the shimmer of heat and sand. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. When she returned to the barn, Taza was asleep again, his breathing even. She looked at him, this man who should have been her enemy, and felt the first threads of something new forming in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but understanding. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "What have I done, Lord?" Outside, a hawk circled high above the desert, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the faint echo of distant drums began to sound. The wind carried them softly, almost too faint to hear, but they were getting closer. The day dragged on under a merciless sun. Heat waves shimmered off the plains, and Clara could feel every tick of time pressing down on her shoulders. Inside the barn, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of medicine and sweat. Taza slept fitfully, his breath ragged, his brow damp with fever. Clara sat nearby on a wooden stool, wiping his forehead every so often, her mind a battlefield of its own. She knew what harboring him meant. If soldiers found out, they wouldn't ask questions, they'd hang her without trial. But whenever she thought of turning him out, her conscience screamed louder than her fear. She glanced toward the door, where her rifle leaned against the wall. "Maybe I've gone mad," she thought. "Maybe kindness has no place left in this land." Outside, the desert sang its dry, lonely song. A buzzard circled lazily overhead, the sound of its wings slicing through the stillness. In the distance, she could see thin trails of dust, maybe soldiers, maybe riders, maybe nothing at all. Out here, everything blurred between danger and mirage. By afternoon, Taza stirred, muttering words in Apache. Clara leaned forward, catching fragments, something about the fire, the river, the children. His voice trembled with pain and memory. She dipped a cloth in cool water and touched it to his lips. "You're safe," she whispered, though she didn't quite believe it herself. "No one will find you here." When he woke fully, his dark eyes searched the room, then fixed on her. "You dream?" he asked weakly. Clara smiled faintly. "No, you were dreaming. Talking in your sleep." He frowned, trying to recall, but gave up. "I see smoke," he said. "Many houses, soldiers, my people run. I try to stop them. No one listens." His words came slowly, heavy with regret. Clara listened, unsure what to say. War had carved scars into both their worlds, one in the name of civilization, the other in the name of survival. "I've heard what the army says about you," she said softly. "They call you a savage, a killer." He met her gaze, unflinching. "And what you call the men who kill my people?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Taza continued, voice low and even. "They burn our camps. They take our land. They kill women, children. We fight, because we have no place left to go." Clara felt her stomach twist. She wanted to argue to defend her people, but the words felt hollow. In his eyes, she saw something raw and painful. "Truth. I don't know who's right anymore," she admitted. "All I know is that dying never ends." He studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, "You are not like the others." Clara gave a weary laugh. "Don't be so sure. I've had hate in my heart before." Taza nodded slowly, as though he understood. "Hate is easy. Mercy is harder." His words hung in the air, simple yet heavy. As evening fell, Clara lit the lantern again. Shadows stretched long across the barn walls. She fed him broth made from herbs and rabbit meat, then checked his bandages. The wound was still angry, but clean. He would live, if fever didn't take him first. "You should rest," she said, pulling a blanket over him. He hesitated, then looked up. "If soldiers come, I'll handle them." She interrupted firmly. "You just worry about breathing." A faint smile ghosted across his lips, the first she'd seen from him. You have brave heart, Clara. Her name, in his voice startled, hurt sounded different, heavier, almost sacred. She turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with her supplies. Get some sleep, she said again, when she finally stepped outside. The desert sky had turned violet and red, painted with the fire of a dying sun. The wind had shifted cooler now, whispering through the tall grass like a warning. She stood there for a long while, staring toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, soldiers hunted the very man lying in her barn. And somewhere else, perhaps not far, his people were searching for their missing chief. Clara didn't know which would find her first. As she went back inside, she paused at the door and looked at him one more time. Taza slept, his face softer now, the weight of command momentarily gone. She whispered, Lord, if mercy is a sin, forgive me, but I'd rather die showing it than live without it. The desert answered with silence, but high above, a hawk cried a long, echoing sound that faded into the coming night, and somewhere, far across the canyon, another cry answered it. Clara had lived long enough to know peace on the frontier was a thin veil, easily torn. She stepped out of her cabin, her eyes scanning the horizon. The silence felt wrong, too heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Rufus pawed nervously at the ground near the corral, ears flicking toward the canyon. Even the goats huddled close to the fence. Uneasy, Clara's stomach twisted. She poured a bit of water into her hands and splashed her face, trying to shake off the feeling. Then she went to the barn. Inside, Taza lay half awake, the light catching the beads in his hair. The color was back in his skin, and the fever had broken. He looked stronger, too strong to stay hidden for long. You're healing faster than anyone I've ever seen, Clara said, setting down a bowl of stew she'd made. He managed a small nod. My mother, medicine woman. She'll teach me herbs, spirit healing. Clara smiled faintly. Well, whatever she taught you is working. She helped him sit up and handed him the bowl. He ate slowly, with deliberate calm. For a moment, it almost felt like any other morning, two people sharing a meal. No war, no sides. But then, a sudden sound outside shattered the illusion. The sharp, rhythmic clatter of hooves. Clara froze. Her spoon slipped from her hand, clanging against the bowl. Taz's head snapped toward the door. Soldiers? He asked, already tensing. Clara's heart pounded. Stay down, she whispered, rushing to the window. Through the thin cracks between the boards, she saw them, 4 men in dusty blue coats, riding slowly toward the ranch. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust, rifles gleaming in the morning light. The lead rider, a tall man with a gray beard, was Captain Morley, the same man who'd questioned her 2 nights before. Damn it, Clara hissed under her breath. Taza tried to rise, but pain forced him back down. You cannot let them find me. I won't, she said, but you have to trust me. He met her gaze for a heartbeat, then nodded. Clara threw an old tarp over him and scattered hay across it. Don't move, no matter what happens, she whispered, then hurried out, wiping her hands on her apron to hide the tremor. By the time the riders reached her porch, she had her calmest smile ready. Mornin', Miss Whitmore, Captain Morley greeted, tipping his hat. Sorry to bother you again, ma'am. We're still tracking that Apache devil who escaped the canyon ambush 2 nights ago. Still, she asked, feigning surprise. You boys must have chased half the desert by now. Morley's expression hardened. He's no ordinary Apache. Their chief name's Taza. We wounded him bad, but he's slippery. Left a trail near this area. Clara's stomach turned, but her face didn't show it. Can't say I've seen anyone. Just me and my animals out here. The captain's eyes flicked to the barn. You sure about that? Her pulse hammered in her ears. Only thing in there's hay and hard work, she said lightly. Morley dismounted, boots crunching on the dry earth. Mind if I take a look? For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed no, but saying that would only make things worse. She forced a shrug. Be my guest. Just watch your step. My old mare doesn't take kindly to strangers. He gave a short nod and walked toward the barn, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Clara followed close behind, praying under her breath. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The tarp-covered pile where Taza lay looked painfully obvious to her eyes. Morley scanned the space, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He prodded the tarp with his boot. The faintest movement trembled beneath it, barely noticeable, but enough to make Clara's heart stop. Everything all right, Captain? She said quickly, forcing a chuckle. You look like you've seen a ghost. Morley hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he grunted and turned away. Just hay, he muttered. If he came through here, he's gone now. Clara exhaled slowly, gripping her apron to keep her hands from shaking. As the soldiers mounted their horses, Morley gave her one last look. If you see anything, anyone, you send word to Fort Lowell. Understand? Of course, she said, smiling as if she meant it. They rode off in a cloud of dust, their silhouettes shrinking against the burning horizon. Clara waited until they were gone before rushing back into the barn. She pulled the tarp off and gasped. Taza lay pale and sweating, clutching his side. You saved me again, he whispered hoarsely. She pressed a hand to his shoulder, both furious and relieved. Next time, maybe try not to get yourself hunted by half the army. Despite the pain, he managed a faint grin. You lie. Very well. Clara sighed and shook her head. You have no idea how close that was. Outside, the dust of the soldiers' horses hung in the air like smoke. The danger had passed, but not for long, for deep in the desert, far beyond sight, someone else had already found Taz's trail, and this time, they weren't wearing blue. The day after the soldiers rode away, the air seemed unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, no sound except the slow creak of the barn door swaying in the breeze. Clara stood outside for a long moment, hands on her hips, watching the empty horizon where Captain Morley had disappeared. She could still hear his voice echoing in her mind. If you see anything, anyone, you send word to Fort Lowell. She had nodded then, but she'd already made her choice. Inside, Taz stirred. His breathing was rough, but his eyes were alert again. The fever had broken, and the lines of pain across his face had softened. Clara brought him a cup of water, and he took it silently, drinking until his shoulders relaxed. You saved me, he said quietly, looking at her with an intensity that made her look away. I nearly got us both killed, she muttered, setting the cup aside. He shook his head. You lie to your own soldiers. Risk life. For me, I didn't do it for you, she said sharply, but her voice cracked. She sighed and sat down on a hay bale, elbows resting on her knees. Maybe I just didn't want to see more blood spilled on my land. I've seen enough death for 10 lifetimes. Taza watched her for a long moment. You speak like warrior, he said. Clara let out a short laugh. I'm no warrior, chief, I'm just stubborn. That earned a faint smile from him, the first genuine one she'd seen. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps people alive. For a moment, the air between them lightened. Then, as if remembering who he was, he grew serious again. Your husband, he fight my people. She hesitated. He was part of the cavalry. They said it was for protection. I suppose he believed that. Taz's eyes darkened, but not with anger, with understanding. He fight because he was told to. I fight because I must. Both bleed, both lose, as Clara nodded slowly. War doesn't care who's right. It just eats everything. Silence settled over the barn. Dust floated lazily through beams of sunlight breaking through the slats. For a long while, they said nothing. Then Taza spoke again, his tone different now, quieter, deeper. When I was boy, my father teach me this. If enemy shows mercy, it is gift from Creator, you do not forget it. He reached for the leather cord around his neck and pulled something from beneath his shirt, a small silver amulet shaped like a hawk. The metal was old and dull, but its detail was fine, clearly crafted with care. He held it out to her. This protects you, he said simply. Clara blinked, startled. Taza, I can't take that. You saved my life. I give thanks. She looked at the amulet, uncertain. I don't want your people thinking I stole from their chief. He gave a faint smirk. They know I give. They respect gift. Clara hesitated, then accepted it gently. The metal was cool against her skin. Thank you, she said softly. I'll keep it safe. He nodded. When you wear it, no Apache will harm you. She smiled faintly. I'll hold you to that promise. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. You have spirit like mountain, he murmured. Strong, still unmoving. Clara watched him, unsure how to respond. In his presence, the boundaries she'd always known, settler and native, enemy and friend, began to blur. She saw not a savage or a legend, but a man, weary, proud, human. Outside, the sky had turned the color of burnt gold. Clara stood and walked to the barn door, letting the evening air wash over her. She looked out toward the ridge. The world felt too quiet. Something in her gut twisted, that instinct again, whispering that stillness never lasted long out here. When she turned back, Taza was watching her. His voice was low, steady. You should leave here soon. Soldiers, come back. Or my people, your people. She asked. He nodded slowly. They look for me. If they think you hurt me, they will bring fire. Clara's hand went to the hawk amulet instinctively. And if they know I helped you, he met her gaze with a flicker of something almost like sadness. Then, I will stop them. She swallowed hard. The thought of being caught between both sides, the army on one end, the Apache on the other, made her chest tighten. Still, she said quietly, then we'd better make sure you're strong enough to leave before either finds us. Taza inclined his head in agreement. Tomorrow, he said, when the sun rises. Clara nodded, trying to steady her voice. Tomorrow. Then, she turned away to hide her unease, but her heart beat faster with every passing minute, because deep down, she already knew, tomorrow would not bring peace, it would bring reckoning. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the dim fire in her cabin, rubbing the small silver hawk amulet between her fingers, its metal glinting in the flicker of flame. Tomorrow, Taza would leave. That should have brought relief. It didn't. Single quotes. She had spent the past week nursing him from the edge of death, risking her life to hide him from the soldiers. Now, the thought of him vanishing into the desert felt strangely hollow, like a chapter ending before it was ready. Through the thin wooden wall, She could hear his slow, rhythmic breathing from the barn. He was healing fast, too fast for any ordinary man. There was strength in him, something almost untamed. But what haunted her most was the quiet respect that had formed between them. Something deeper than words, born from shared silence and danger. She glanced toward the window. The moon was sinking low. Dawn wasn't far. Her heart felt heavy, and though she tried to fight it, the question escaped her lips in a whisper. What happens when he's gone? The fire popped softly, offering no answer. Just before sunrise, Clara stepped into the cool morning air. Mist rolled across the fields, wrapping the land in silver haze. The barn door creaked open, and Taza emerged, steady, tall, wrapped in a woven blanket that hung over his broad shoulders. His face looked stronger now, but his eyes held that same quiet intensity. You shouldn't be on your feet yet, Clara said. He gave her a small, knowing smile. The earth heals me, the sun gives strength. I must go before light grows. She handed him a canteen and a small satchel of food, dried bread, salt pork, a few apples. You'll need this, she said. He took it with a nod, then glanced toward the ridge in the distance. They wait for me, my people. Clara swallowed. Do they know where you are? Taz's gaze flickered toward her. They always know. Spirit walks between us. That answer sent a chill through her. She'd heard tales how Apache scouts could read tracks invisible to the white man's eye, how they could move like shadows and strike before dawn. Still, she met his gaze with a faint smile. Then I guess I'll have to trust they know I helped you. Taza looked at her for a long moment, then stepped closer. They will see your heart. He touched the hawk amulet hanging around her neck. This speaks for you now. Her breath caught. Will they believe it? He nodded. If they see me first. The way he said it, if they see me first, made her chest tighten. You mean to protect me? She asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes searched hers, and in that silence, she knew the truth. Yes, he said finally. You saved my life. I will not let you lose yours because of it. She wanted to speak to tell him that she'd done what any decent person would have done, but the words stuck in her throat, because they both knew that wasn't true. Mercy wasn't common in the frontier. Taza fastened his bow across his back and glanced at the rising sun. It is time. Clara nodded, her voice barely steady. Be careful out there, Chief. He gave her that faint, half-smile again. Taza, he said softly. Not Chief, only Taza. She returned the smile, eyes glistening. Then goodbye, Taza. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth of him against the morning chill. Not goodbye, he said. In my tongue, we say dudachi. It means we will meet again. And before she could respond, he turned and started toward the open land. His silhouette moved through the mist, tall and silent, until it melted into the horizon like a spirit returning home. Clara stood there for a long time, her hand resting over the amulet on her chest. The morning sun crept higher, and for a moment she almost believed peace might return to her land. But as the light grew stronger, she noticed something, faint movement on the far ridge. Dark figures, dozens of them, gliding down the slope like ghosts on horseback. Her stomach dropped. They weren't soldiers, they were Apache. She backed toward her cabin, heart pounding. The hawk amulet gleamed in the sunlight, the only thing standing between her and the storm that was about to break. The echo of hooves grew louder. 200 warriors were coming straight for her. And Taza, the man she had saved, was the only one who could decide whether they came as friends or as executioners. The earth trembled. Clara could feel it through the soles of her boots. The rhythmic pounding of hooves drawing closer, rolling over the land like distant thunder. The air itself seemed to shiver. Dust rose along the horizon in thick, swirling columns, and from that haze emerged a sea of riders, Apache warriors, fierce and silent, their painted faces streaked with ochre and white, their spears catching the morning light. Clara's breath hitched. She stumbled backward toward her porch, heart hammering. Her trembling hand clutched the hawk amulet against her chest. Dear Lord, she whispered, not like this. Within minutes, the riders encircled her small ranch, forming a ring that stretched from the corral to the creek bed. There were dozens, no, hundreds. Their horses snorted and pawed the dirt, eyes glinting. Not one of the warriors spoke. The leader rode forward, a tall man with broad shoulders, his black hair bound with red cloth. His face was marked by 2 white streaks that ran from his temples to his jawline. He looked powerful, but his gaze was cold, sharp as obsidian. Clara swallowed hard and forced herself to stand straight. I'm not your enemy, she said aloud, her voice steady despite her fear. I helped one of your own. The Apache chief, or so she guessed. He was dismounted slowly. His eyes never left hers as he stepped closer. The others shifted behind him like a single body, silent and alert. He stopped a few paces away. You speak our name, he said in slow, careful English. You say you help one of us who... Clara hesitated, her pulse quickening. His name is Taza, she said. He was wounded. He would have died out there. But before she could finish, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The chief's expression changed, not anger, but disbelief. Taza, he said softly, you lie. I don't, she said quickly, lifting the amulet from around her neck. He gave me this. The reaction was immediate. The circle of warriors tightened, their weapons lowering slightly as whispers spread among them. The chief's eyes widened for the first time, not in rage, but in recognition. "That mark," he said slowly. "The hawk of the Tenna band. Only Taza carries it." Clara clutched it tighter. "Then you know I'm telling the truth." The chief studied her face, his expression unreadable. "If you speak truth, then where is he?" Clara pointed toward the canyon ridge. "He left at dawn, said his people would find him." The chief's gaze hardened. "Then we will see if that is true." He raised his hand and barked a command in Apache. 2 scouts broke from the circle and rode toward the ridge. The rest stayed where they were, eyes trained on her cabin. Clara stood frozen on her porch, her knuckles white around the amulet. The minutes dragged like hours. Finally, the scouts returned, and behind them rode a familiar figure. Taza. Her breath caught. He looked stronger, alive, commanding no longer the wounded man she'd tended, but the chief he truly was. His painted face gleamed with sweat and dust, and around his neck, his people's sacred symbols had been restored. The warriors began to murmur his name, some bowing their heads. Taza dismounted and strode toward her, the crowd parting to let him through. His expression was unreadable as he approached, but when his eyes met hers, something softened in them, a flicker of quiet recognition. Clara exhaled shakily. "You didn't tell me you were there, Chief," she whispered. "I am only Chief because they need me," he said, "and because you made sure I lived long enough to return." The tall warrior beside him, the one who had confronted her, bowed his head. "We thought she'd take you captive. We came for war." Taza shook his head. "No war. She healed me. She is under my protection." A ripple passed through the gathered warriors, a murmur of approval, surprise, and relief. The tension that had gripped the air began to ease, like thunder rolling away. The tall chief turned back to Clara and inclined his head. Slightly, the closest thing to respect she had ever seen from a man like him. "Then you are friend to the Apache," he said. Clara let out a long, shaky breath. I don't know what to say." Taza's lips curved into a faint smile. "Say nothing. You have already said enough with your heart." For the first time, Clara felt the fear in her chest begin to loosen. Around her, the Apache warriors lowered their weapons, their faces no longer hard but calm, curious, even grateful. She looked up at Taza, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" He glanced toward the rising sun, its light casting gold across the land. "Now," he said, "we leave you in peace. No Apache will harm you, nor your land. You will be remembered as the woman who healed the wounded hawk." He turned to mount his horse, but then paused. "Clara Whitmore," he said softly, "when the wind carries the cry of the hawk, know it is me, watching over you." And with that, he rode off, leading his people back toward the mountains, their forms fading into the morning mist. Clara stood on her porch long after they were gone, the amulet warm against her palm. The land was quiet again, but she knew somewhere out there the man she had saved still rode beneath the wide desert sky. And though they came from different worlds, their souls would forever share one promise: mercy, once given, never dies. The Apache had long since vanished beyond the horizon, leaving only the whisper of wind and the faint hoofprints carved into the dust. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, arms folded, watching the trail where Taza and his warriors had disappeared. The silence felt heavy, not fearful, not empty, but sacred, like the calm after a storm that had changed everything. For days, she had lived under the shadow of danger. Now that the danger had passed, she felt something unexpected: loss. The ranch looked the same, the fences, the barn, the scorched patch near the well, but Clara wasn't the same woman who had once tended this land in solitude. She had seen the world shift in the space of a heartbeat. She had watched enemies become protectors. And somewhere between bandaging a stranger's wounds and watching him ride away at dawn, she had found courage she didn't know she had. She turned the silver hawk amulet in her hand. The morning light caught its edges, throwing a gleam across her fingers. She could almost hear Taza's voice in the wind. "When the hawk cries, it means I watch over you." A sharp cry echoed faintly from the distance. Clara looked up instinctively. High above, a hawk circled against the blue sky, gliding effortlessly over the land. A shiver ran through her. "Part awe, part peace, Dudachi," she whispered. "We will meet again." That afternoon, a wagon approached from the north. Clara's heart sank when she saw the familiar blue uniforms glinting in the light. The cavalry back again. Captain Morley dismounted first, his expression hard and suspicious. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called. "You alone?" She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Same as before." He looked around, scanning the yard, the barn, the fields. "We saw a dust trail heading east this morning. Looked like a large Apache warband." "You see them?" Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. "I saw riders," she said. "They didn't stop here." Morley squinted at her, trying to read her expression. "You sure?" Clara met his gaze evenly. "Quite sure, Captain." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, lucky you. If they had, you'd likely be nothing but smoke and ashes." Clara smiled faintly. Seems the Lord was watching over me. Morley tipped his hat, still not entirely convinced. You're a brave woman, Mrs. Whitmore. If you see anything again, send word. I will, she lied. The soldiers rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Clara stood there until they disappeared from sight, then turned slowly toward her barn. The faint scent of cedar and dried herbs still lingered where she had tended Taz's wounds. For a moment, she knelt on the barn floor, tracing the marks in the hay, the faint impressions of where he'd lain. The dark stains, long since dried. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a bond, invisible but unbreakable. As evening fell, Clara sat outside with a lantern beside her, the orange glow flickering across her face. She watched the desert stretch endlessly before her, silent, wild, beautiful. Every so often, she thought she saw something moving far in the distance, a figure on horseback outlined against the dying sun. But when she blinked, it would fade, leaving her to wonder if it had ever been there at all. Still, the land no longer felt lonely, it felt alive, like it remembered. The wind brushed through the grass, whispering in the Apache tongue she didn't understand but somehow felt in her soul. A language of gratitude, of promises kept. She touched the amulet at her neck and smiled faintly. You kept your word, Taza, she murmured. The land is at peace again. Somewhere beyond the canyon, a hawk cried once more, a long, low call that echoed across the open plains. And in that sound, Clara felt no fear, only belonging. Weeks later, travelers from nearby settlements began to whisper strange things, that Apache raiders had vanished from the area, that no settler's ranch had been touched for miles. They spoke of a truce no one signed, but everyone felt, a quiet understanding between enemies. When asked about it, Clara only smiled. Maybe the land just needed time to heal. She said they didn't know about the man she'd saved, the warrior who'd changed everything. But when the hawks flew low over her ranch, Clara would look up and whisper that same promise again. Do-dash-dash-dash-E. And somewhere far beyond the mountains, a man who once lay dying beneath her roof would hear the wind, touch the mark of the healer woman's mercy over his heart, and whisper back, we will meet again. 5 years passed. The Arizona plains had changed, though not as much as the people who lived upon them. The railroad now cut through the valleys, where the wild herds once ran, and the sound of steel and steam replaced the cry of the hawk. But out by the old canyon ridge, Clara Whitmore's ranch still stood, a lonely wooden home, against a vast and golden world. Her hair had begun to show strands of silver. Though her spirit had lost none of its quiet fire, she had become somewhat of a legend among the settlers, the woman who lived alone where no Apache dared to tread. They didn't know the real reason why. Each morning, she still looked toward the east, where the mountains met the sky. And every so often, when the wind carried the right kind of silence, she swore she could hear that same hawk's cry, a memory calling her name. Life had settled into rhythm again. She mended fences, traded with passing travelers, and sometimes rode into town for supplies. She smiled more easily now, though her eyes always seemed to be searching the horizon. That was where she was mending a fence near the creek. When the sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness, Clara froze. It wasn't the hurried rhythm of soldiers or settlers. It was slower, measured, familiar. Her heart began to race. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. A lone rider approached from the west. The horse was dark and strong, its mane braided with leather ties. The man on its back wore no uniform, no badge, only a blanket of woven red and gold, and a necklace of carved bone and turquoise that glimmered in the sunlight. For a moment, Clara thought her mind was playing tricks. But when he dismounted and lifted his face toward her, there was no mistaking those eyes, calm, deep, full of memory. Taza, she breathed, her voice trembling. He gave a faint, warm smile. Dudachi, he said softly, we meet again. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. Then she stepped forward, the years between them melting away like morning mist. I thought I'd never see you again, she whispered. I promised the hawk would return, he said. They stood in silence, the air thick with all the words neither had said. You look well, she said finally. Stronger, he nodded. The land remembers your kindness. My people remember too. The fighting has ended. We have peace for now. She smiled faintly. Then it was worth it. Taza looked around her ranch, the rebuilt fences, the rows of corn, the sturdy barn. You kept your home, he said, and your courage. I suppose both were stubborn enough to survive, she replied, a hint of humor in her tone. He studied her a moment longer. The world changes fast, he said. Soon, the rails will reach the mountain. The soldiers come less now, but settlers come more. Many of my people move north. Some go beyond the river. Her smile faded slightly. And you, where will you go? He was quiet for a long time. I do not know. The land that raised me no longer belongs to us. But I will not leave it, not yet. Their eyes met, and for that single moment, the past returned in full. The barn, the blood, the fear, the fragile trust that had grown between them. Taza stepped closer. From a pouch at his side, he drew something wrapped in leather. He opened it carefully. Inside was a new amulet, carved from bone, shaped like a soaring hawk with wings spread wide. I made this, he said softly. For the healer woman who saw no enemy in me, Clara's throat tightened. Taza, I can't, you can, he interrupted gently, because this land remembers us both. When I am gone, you will not be alone. The wind will carry my voice. The hawk will guard your sky. She took the amulet, her hands trembling. The moment her fingers brushed his, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, respect, something deeper than either could name. I'll treasure it, she whispered. He gave a faint nod. Then my heart is at peace. Taza turned toward his horse, ready to mount again. But before he did, Clara said, will you come back? He paused, glancing toward the wide horizon. If the wind calls me here, he said, I will follow it. Their eyes met one last time, and then, with a soft click of his tongue, he rode away into the setting sun. The red sky behind him glowing like fire. Clara watched until the figure disappeared beyond the ridge. Then she looked down at the new amulet in her hands. The faint sound of a hawk echoing above her. She smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. Dudachi, she whispered to the wind, we will meet again. And somewhere far across the desert, where the light met the mountains, a hawk's cry answered her, clear, strong, and eternal. Tracks of iron, and the wild silence of Arizona had given way to the noise of progress. New towns rose, filled with voices that no longer remembered the old days, the days when Apaches roamed the mesas and settlers carved out lonely lives against a harsh, magnificent land. But out by the canyon ridge, an old house still stood. Its roof was mended, its paint faded, its porch creaking in the desert wind. Grass and mesquite had begun to reclaim the edges of the fence. No one had lived there for years, yet sometimes, travelers swore they saw a light in the window, faint and golden, like a lantern carried by a gentle hand. It was said the house once belonged to Clara Whitmore, the woman who had lived alone at the edge of Apache country, back when peace was still fragile and the wilds untamed. Children in town would whisper her story, of the night she nursed a wounded Apache chief back to life, and of how his warriors surrounded her home the next morning, ready for vengeance, until their leaders stopped them with a single raised hand. They said the chief's name was Taza, son of the mountains, called the Hawk of the Plains, and they said that for the rest of her life. No Apache ever raised a weapon against her land. Her ranch, her fences, her crops, all remained untouched, protected by some unseen watch over the years. No one could prove it, but the elders swore it was true. One spring morning, long after Clara was gone, a group of ranch hands clearing the brush behind the house found a small grave near the edge of the property. The cross was hand-carved, the name nearly worn away by time and dust. All that could still be read were the words, "She healed with courage, not fear." Beneath the cross lay an old leather pouch, sealed and wrapped in care. Inside was an amulet, a hawk carved from bone, wings outstretched. Its edges were smooth from being held too often. The men didn't know what to make of it. Some wanted to take it to town, maybe sell it. But an older man, one of the few who still spoke a little Apache, stopped them. "This doesn't belong to us," he said. "It belongs to the wind." They reburied the amulet with respect and left the grave as they found it. From that day forward, the place became known as Hawk's Rest. Travelers would leave small stones by the cross, offerings to whatever spirit watched over that lonely corner of the desert. Over time, the story spread, first through campfires, then through books, and later even on the radio. Historians debated whether Clara and Taza ever truly existed, or whether they were simply a legend born of the West's endless hunger for romance and redemption. But among the Apache, an old tale endured of a warrior chief who was wounded in battle, found by a white woman who tended his wounds without fear, and of the bond that formed between them under a blood-red moon. They called her the White Hawk Woman. And when the wind swept over the plains at dusk, some said they could still see two figures standing side by side on the ridge, one in a long pale dress, the other wrapped in red and gold, a hawk circling above them in the burning sky. One watching over the land, the other guarding her from beyond it. For, though the world had changed, some things never fade: courage, kindness, and the quiet truth that even across worlds divided by fear and blood, two souls can still recognize each other. Years later, a historian visiting the site wrote in his journal, "Perhaps this story is myth, but every myth begins with a heartbeat. I stood there today, by the grave at Hawk's Rest, and a hawk circled once above me, just once before flying east. And for a moment, I could swear I heard a woman's voice whisper on the wind, 'Tashi, we meet again.'" The wind rolled softly across the desert that evening, warm, golden, and full of memory. It carried the scent of mesquite and rain, weaving through the canyon cliffs like an old song. In that whispering wind, the land seemed alive with echoes, hooves thundering from another time, laughter fading through the sage, and the faint voice of a woman calling a name that had long since vanished into history. Her name was Clara Whitmore. His name was Taza. And though their story had become legend, the land remembered. A young woman named Alina Ruiz, a university researcher from Tucson, arrived at Hawk's Rest one bright morning with a notebook, a camera, and the restless curiosity of youth. She had come chasing history stories her grandmother used to tell her about La Dama de la Blanca. The Lady of the White Hawk, Alina, had read the accounts, newspaper fragments, faded letters, and a half-burned diary believed to belong to Clara herself. But standing there, among the scattered stones and whispering grass, the pages of her research suddenly felt small and cold. But she felt out here was alive. She found the grave beneath a crooked oak, the name barely legible now. The wind tugged at her scarf as she knelt, brushing the dust from the wooden cross. She healed with courage, not fear. Alina read the words softly. What kind of woman were you, Clara? She whispered. A shadow passed overhead, a hawk, circling slow and wide, as if answering her. She smiled faintly, then noticed something glinting between the rocks. It was an old pendant, half buried, carved from bone, its wings etched with symbols she didn't recognize. The same design she'd seen in Apache museums, sacred to the Taza lineage. Her pulse quickened. Could it be? She held the amulet gently, feeling its smoothness, worn by countless fingers. The air seemed to shift around her, the world turning still. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard footsteps, slow, measured, approaching from behind. Alina. The voice was deep, soft, unmistakably masculine. She spun around. No one, only the wind through the brush. Her breath caught. Who's there? Silence, then faint, like an echo from another world, a whisper. The heart remembers what time forgets. The air shimmered, and in the dying light, she thought she saw them, two figures standing at the ridge above her. One cloaked in white, hair unbound and golden in the sun. The other tall, proud, with an eagle's feather in his braid and eyes dark as twilight. They stood side by side, gazing toward the horizon where the desert met the sky. Eternal, peaceful. The vision faded as the sun dipped low. Alina stood frozen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know whether to call it magic, memory, or madness, but she knew it was real. She placed the pendant carefully back on the grave and whispered, "Rest easy, both of you. Your story will be told." That night, as the stars rose like embers above the plain, Alina sat by her campfire and began to write. Her words flowed as though guided by another hand. They say, love can't bridge worlds, that blood and war divide too deeply. But once, on a lonely ranch between heaven and earth, a woman's mercy rewrote the language of enemies. The healer and the warrior, bound not by tribe or color, but by something far greater, compassion. She closed her notebook as the firelight flickered, her face illuminated by its glow. In the distance, the cry of a hawk echoed one last time through the canyon. Alina looked up, smiling. "I'll make sure they remember you," she whispered. And as the embers rose into the night sky, glowing, fading, and disappearing into the stars, it felt as though the land itself exhaled. Content, years later. When her book was published, The Wind Remembers, the story of the White Hawk woman. People came from all over to visit Hawk's Rest. They left feathers, white flowers, or small stones by the grave. And those who stayed until dusk sometimes swore they saw a hawk gliding overhead, always toward the east, always at sunset. Some claimed it was just coincidence. Others said it was a spirit. But those who truly listened to the wind would tell you, the hawk still flies for her, and the desert still remembers. The desert floor. The air was cool and still, the kind of silence that makes the world feel sacred. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the campfire pot, and opened her notebook. Rereading what she had written the night before, it almost didn't feel like her own words. They carried a rhythm, a warmth, that seemed to belong to someone else, someone older, wiser, and deeply at peace. She decided to explore the house again before leaving. The structure was half collapsed, the wood gray and splintered, but she could still imagine the life that had once filled it, the smell of fresh bread, the creak of the rocking chair, the rustle of a dress moving across the floorboards near the back corner of what used to be the kitchen. Her boot struck something hollow beneath the dust. She knelt, brushed the floor clean, and found a small wooden panel loose in the floorboards. Beneath it lay a tin box, rusted shut. Her heart raced. She pried it open with her pocket knife. Inside was a small leather-bound book, edges frayed, pages yellowed with age. The initials CW were pressed faintly into the cover. Clara Whitmore. Alina's fingers trembled as she opened the diary. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible, steady, deliberate handwriting that carried both strength and grace. She sat down by the broken window, the morning light spilling across the page, and began to read. August 14, 1872. I do not know if I will live long enough to see peace between our people, but I have seen what the heart is capable of. The man I saved, his name is Taza. At first, I thought I was helping an enemy. Now, I understand he was sent here to teach me what courage truly is. He told me once that the hawk does not fly for war or peace, only for balance. Perhaps that is what we must learn, to live not as conquerors or victims, but as keepers of the same sky. Alina turned the page carefully, afraid the paper might tear. August 22nd. He is healing. Each day he grows stronger, though I see a sadness in his eyes. I asked him what troubles him. He said, "Your people and mine will never understand one another, but maybe you and I can." I do not know what to make of this feeling inside me. I fear it, and yet it feels like truth. Perhaps love is not the absence of fear. Perhaps it is the will to look past it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. The words were so human, so vulnerable, she could almost hear Clara's voice in the wind outside. She turned to the final entry, written in a trembling hand. September 2nd. He is leaving at dawn. His people call him back. He says his duty lies with them, and I know he speaks truth. He gave me his pendant, the hawk of his people, and said it will protect me when I am alone. I gave him a lock of my hair in return, tied with the blue ribbon I wore on the day we met. I will never forget his words as he rode away. One day, when the land is quiet, our spirits will meet again. The hawk will guide you home. I have lived through fire and loss, but this parting feels like a different kind of wound, one that never truly heals. Still, I would not trade a single moment of it, for in saving his life, I found my own. Elena closed the book, pressing her palm gently against the worn cover. For a long time, she sat in silence, letting the emotions settle around her like dust in the sunlight. Now she understood. Clara hadn't just been a healer or a lonely widow. She had been a bridge between worlds that no one else dared to cross. Elena carefully wrapped the diary in cloth and placed it back inside the tin box. But she didn't rebury it. Not this time. She would take it with her, not for fame or fortune, but so the story would live on. In her words, in her generation. As she stepped outside, the wind picked up once more. A hawk soared overhead, crying out sharply, as if in blessing. Elena smiled, clutching the diary to her chest. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered. "Your story won't be forgotten." And somewhere beyond the ridge, where the desert met the clouds, the wind carried a faint reply, soft, certain, and eternal, "Nor will yours." 15 years later, the world had changed again. The frontier that once belonged to wild horses and dust storms now echoed with the hum of trucks and radio towers. Towns had grown where open plains once stretched endlessly, but some places, rare and stubborn, remained untouched. One of them was Hawk's Rest. A silver car wound its way along the old desert road that led to the ridge. The driver, now in her mid-40s, had soft streaks of gray in her dark hair and the calm gaze of someone who had made peace with time. Her name was still Elena Ruiz. Now Dr. Elena Ruiz. Historian, author, and speaker. But more than that, she was the keeper of a promise. The back seat of her car held a small wooden box. The same tin box she had found beneath Clara's floorboards all those years ago. Lovingly restored and lined with velvet. Inside it lay the diary of Clara Whitmore, along with a single bone pendant carved in the shape of a hawk. Elena stepped out of the car and felt the wind hit her face. The air smelled just as it had the first time, warm, dry, eternal. She climbed the ridge slowly, the sand crunching under her boots, until she reached the lonely oak that still guarded the grave. The wooden cross had long since fallen, but someone had replaced it with a stone marker years before. Chiseled into it were the words Elena had written in her book, "Mercy is the bravest act of all." She knelt before the grave, setting the box gently upon the stone. "I brought it home," she said softly. The wind stirred the dry grass around her, whispering through the canyon below. She opened the box, her fingers tracing the edge of the diary. Its pages were fragile now, but the ink Clara's steady hand still carried the same quiet power. "I think you'd be happy to know," Elena said with a faint smile. "Your story traveled the world. They study it in classrooms now. The woman who saved the Apache chief, the healer who brought peace to the desert." She laughed quietly. "Some people don't even believe you were real, but I do." A hawk's cry echoed above her, sharp and lonely. She looked up. There it was, circling in the amber sky, wings spread wide against the fading sun. The same direction as always, east. Elena rose to her feet, the wind tugging gently at her scarf. She lifted the pendant from the box, holding it to the light. For a moment, the bones seemed to shimmer, the carved wings alive with reflection. She could almost see them there again. Clara, standing barefoot by her cabin, her golden hair caught in the sunset breeze, and Taza tall and still beside her, the eagle feather in his braid fluttering softly. They weren't ghosts, they were remnants, the kind that lived in the air, in the soil, in the hearts of those who remembered. Elena pressed a pendant to her chest. "You kept your promise, Taza," she whispered. "You never left her unguarded." Then, with tears gathering in her eyes, she set the pendant gently atop the grave. "I'll leave it here," she said, "where it belongs." The sun was sinking fast, now the sky burning with crimson and gold, painting the desert in fire. The wind carried a faint sound through the canyon, not words, not quite, but something close. A rhythm, a breath, like two voices blending in the wind. And in that moment, Elena knew the circle was complete. She turned to leave, walking slowly back toward her car, the desert stretching endlessly behind her. But as she reached the ridge and looked back one last time, she froze. The hawk was gone. In its place, two small shapes glowed faintly near the grave, one white, one golden, fading into the wind, like sunlight dissolving into air. Alina smiled through her tears. "Goodbye," she whispered. "You're home now." Then she drove away, the horizon glowing before her, endless, alive, and full of promise. Years later, hikers who passed through Hawk's Rest would tell the same story. Every spring evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, two faint lights would rise above the grave, one shaped like wings, the other like a flame dot, and if the wind was right, you could almost hear a voice carried through the canyon. Tender and sure, the heart remembers what time forgets. And so the legend lived on, of Clara Whitmore, the healer who showed mercy to her enemy, and Taz, the Apache chief who returned that mercy with eternal loyalty, the woman who bandaged the warrior's wounds, and the warrior who protected her soul forever.